We at the State Department look at Burma, China, Sri Lanka, Rwanda, Congo, Sudan. When we look at human rights abuses that are so profound you'd lose sleep over, but we don't conclude with, therefore it doesn't have the right to exist.
This is Faith Complex, a conversation about religion, politics, and art, with your host, Jacques Berlinerblau.
Hello, my name is Jacques Berlinerblau, and you're watching Faith Complex. Joining us today is Ms. Hannah Rosenthal, the State Department's Special Envoy on Anti-Semitism. Hannah, welcome to Faith Complex.
Thanks so much.
All right, so a Special Envoy on Anti-Semitism. What does a Special Envoy on Anti-Semitism do?
Well, Congress created the position and told me what to do. They mandate that I go around the world and monitor in 193 countries the status of anti-Semitism, the status of the Jewish communities. Do they feel vulnerable? How is it going? And the second part is to figure out what to do about the anti-Semitism when we see it.
Yeah, it seems regrettably you must be a busy person because we've noticed an increase in anti-Semitic discourse globally. What are some of the geographical flashpoints for this type of...
Well, I wish I could say there's some places that we don't find anti-Semitism. I can't say that if I'm going to be honest. On every continent, we see incidents of anti-Semitism and upticks. But I'd have to say Europe continues to not deal with the centuries and centuries old anti-Semitism. You would think after the Holocaust that some reckoning would have been done by all the forces, but while things sometimes are better, it's very painful to see. It's still so potent there, and of course in the Middle East.
Name me two countries first in Europe that you're looking at carefully.
Well, let me give you a good example. Let me give you a bad example. Lithuania, whose history, they're a new democracy, 20 years. I mean, we've been working on our democracy over 200 years, so they're working on it. But Lithuania, during the Holocaust, killed the highest percentage of Jews of any country in Europe. So they have a lot of introspection to do, and it's only lately that they've been doing it. But they've been doing it quite sincerely and thoroughly through teacher training, through rededication of memorials and museums. They had an entire year where they focused on victims of the Holocaust and continuing anti-Semitism.
And where in Europe do you have a concern?
Well, I have a concern in almost all the rest of Europe. What's happening in the United Kingdom is happening, and frankly, a lot on college campuses, where the issue of disagreeing with the policy of the State of Israel, which is totally appropriate, but it crosses over into anti-Semitism, and Jewish students and Jewish communities are feeling very vulnerable, harassed, and very uncomfortable. Well,
Hannah, it's a very difficult border to police, but when do legitimate criticisms of the State of Israel veer or transmogrify into anti-Semitism?
Well, first of all, we have to be clear. Criticism of a policy of Israel does not make someone an anti-Semite. If that were the case, over half of Israel would be anti-Semitic. It's a very robust democracy, as are we, and there are people who feel many different ways about different policies. But when does it cross over? And there isn't a bright line, but let me try and explain three ways that we view that crossover to happen. One is when Israel is completely demonized, when it is held responsible for all the ills of the region and in some cases the world. When cartoons portray Israelis as Nazis or as devils with horns and pitchforks. A second way it crosses over is when Israel is being held to a standard different than any other country in the community of nations. And of course, you need only look at the United Nations. In the last 10 years, the United Nations and its various agencies have passed 434 resolutions condemning Israel. Let me put it into context. If you look at North Korea, one of the axis of evils, 5 resolutions. You look at Sudan, a continuing genocide, 8 resolutions. It is being held to a standard no other country in the entire world is being held to. And the third way is where Israel is delegitimized. There are some people who say it never had a right to exist, and there's some people who criticize human rights abuses and say, therefore, Israel doesn't have a right to exist. There's no other country that happens to. We at the State Department look at Burma, China, Sri Lanka, Rwanda, Congo, Sudan. I mean, we look at human rights abuses that are so profound you'd lose sleep over. But we don't conclude with, therefore, it doesn't have the right to exist. The only time that happens is with Israel. And that isn't criticism of a policy of the State of Israel. That is hatred of the collective Jew, and that's anti-Semitism.
All right, so let's go to the neighborhood, if you will, of Israel. With the Arab Spring, we saw an increase in freedom of speech. Ironically, the freedom of speech often facilitated the freedom to express extremely anti-Semitic sentiments. How is the office monitoring and dealing with that situation?
We're monitoring the countries in the Middle East, and particularly Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Bahrain, Yemen. It's a very explosive region right now. There has never been a shyness in expressing anti-Semitism in these countries. So what's being said is not newly being said. But the irony of the Arab awakening is it really wasn't about Israel. Usually in that region, when there was an upheaval of any kind, the thing they could count on to unite people was hatred of Israel. Right. And that has not happened. So there's good news in that. Of course, it's also bad news because still it's the one thing that unites people is hatred of Jews and hatred of Israel. So when the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem 2 weeks ago stands up and says it is our duty to kill Jews, obviously, it caught everyone's attention in the world, but I wish more people had spoken out.
So let me try to understand the model. We had a pre-existing anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist discourse, somebody like the cleric Al-Qaradawi, for example.
Yep.
You're not seeing fresh anti-Semitisms or kind of avant-garde boutique anti-Semitisms that are developing post-Arab Spring, or is something new emerging? Well,
I have to say something new is emerging because more people are feeling empowered.
Right.
But really, what the Arab awakening was about was fundamental freedoms. It really was. It was about freedom of expression, freedom of press, even freedom of religion. Now, how it's going to turn out is anybody's guess. It's going to be a rocky road. But we're still optimistic that at the end of the day, maybe in time for my grandchildren, we're going to see those fundamental freedoms trump the bigotry and trump the hatred that has been stewing there for so many centuries, not decades.
Anna Rosenthal, the Special Envoy on Anti-Semitism for the State Department, thank you so much for coming to Faith Complex
today. Thanks for having me.